He's waited for this night. He's waited for me.
So it's been 2 years since the final installment of the Blumhouse Halloween trilogy came out with Halloween Ends, which of course is this new tangent timeline of the Halloween series, of which now there are 5, I think, official Halloween timelines if you want to follow them through. And 2 years ago when I watched Halloween Ends, I was massively disappointed about it. It's not my least favorite Halloween film, but it damn sure is close. And so I have not seen it since it came out in theaters. But I finally broke down and I bought it because it was the only Halloween movie that I didn't own in the collection. So the completionist in me had to get it. And I was like, well, I already own Halloween Resurrection, so why not just buy Halloween Ends? But I decided when I bought it that I was going to revisit the entire Blumhouse trilogy. So I actually rewatched all 3 movies right in a row, and I thought I would give an updated thoughts and opinions sort of video on them. I know I already did my long Halloween retrospective video where I went into explicit detail and could go into a little bit more detail with writing the script and getting it done better than being off the cuff, but I figured maybe now, 2 years later, I would just give you guys an updated opinion on what I think of the Blumhouse Halloween trilogy, because if there's any definition to me of a mixed bag, it is this trilogy. There are so many things in it that I like, but there are also so many things in it that I despise. And it's so intertwined with one another. Like something great will happen, and then something I hate happens, and something great will happen. And it just goes back and forth like that. And it's such an interesting little series of movies to kind of give a little bit of an introspective look at. So I'm going to give you guys a new updated review of the entire trilogy. And we're going to start with Halloween, the 2018 version, which is the 3rd movie that is just called Halloween, because there's the original Halloween, Halloween from 2007, the remake, and this Halloween, which is also just called Halloween. Technically, it's Halloween 2. So Halloween 2018 decides to pick itself up 40 years later after the original film. However, the original Halloween and the original Halloween 2 take place on the same night, so it's one continuous story. Halloween 2018 decides to forget Halloween 2 and just pick up right after, 40 years after the original Halloween. So all of the extra stuff that happens in Halloween 2, all of the scenes at the hospital, poor Ben Tramer getting blown up with a car, and of course, the big revelation that Laurie Strode and Michael Myers are siblings are no longer part of this continuity. Now, what's really interesting about that is that this is the first time that that has been done, because although, yes, true, in the original Halloween, there is no connection between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. It was meant to be more of the terror of being stalking the babysitters, originally called the Babysitter Murders. It wasn't that he had a motive to kill his sister. It was just more so of, what do you do when this unstoppable, evil, supernatural force just has its eyes set on you? You and your friends throughout the entire film. So taking that away at this point, I can understand, because it wasn't the original intention that John Carpenter had. He threw that in the second movie when he was writing the script, simply because he was just trying to come up with ideas. He wrote the script when he was drunk. He was like, I don't know what to do with this movie. Fine, they're siblings, which I respect. But you have this now established lore since, I believe Halloween 2 came out in 1981. So you have nearly 40 years of an understanding that Laurie Strode and Michael Myers are siblings. So to take that away now is something that kind of bothered me. I was allowing myself to be open enough to see what they had in store for this movie, because what is the point of Laurie Strode kind of coming back into the story if she's moved far away, if life has changed, it's been 40 years later, there's no incentive for Michael Myers to come after her anymore. So what are they going to do with this? And so my big curiosity was, how are they going to kind of establish this dynamic between Laurie and Michael if there is no sibling dynamic here? And you're also taking this established continuity that has existed for nearly 40 years and throwing it out the window. But the other thing that initially bothered me about this is the fact that you got Jamie Lee Curtis to come back into the series. To me, it would have been a better opportunity to fix the mistakes of before, but it seemed like they wanted to ignore it so that they could start fresh and do their own thing, which I completely understand. But what I hate about it is that, to me, Halloween H2O was kind of the perfect ending for the franchise, and then they retroactively ruined that with my least favorite Halloween film, mostly because of that reason, with Halloween Resurrection. Unceremoniously killed Laurie Strode off and then ended with a stupid cliffhanger that goes nowhere because after that the whole series was rebooted. So if you had the opportunity to fix that, maybe Laurie Strode survived the resurrection thing, maybe you could bring Josh Hartnett back, you know, you could continue with that continuity, but they decided not to. And that's just my own personal thing. And look, hey, there's 13 Halloween movies, 12 with Michael Myers. So everybody has their preferred timeline. Everybody has their preferred connections, preferred movies and stuff. And so I can understand, my preferences and the things that I want to see from a Halloween movie are not necessarily going to be the same as somebody else. This is just my opinion. I'm not trying to be objective here. I'm just telling you guys what I think about the films. But my initial reaction was like, okay, if Jamie Lee Curtis is coming back, you have the opportunity to rectify mistakes that were done in the past. But instead, they decided to forgo all of that and just create a new continuity. And so those kind of things rubbed me the wrong way to begin with. And then the other thing that I felt was the biggest and honestly the most monumental missed opportunity of this entire Blumhouse franchise is, okay, you are rebooting the timeline, which means all of these characters from the previous Halloween movies are fair game. You know, nobody's dead. You know, nobody's dead yet except for the people that died in the original Halloween. So in this movie, the 2018 version, they gave Laurie Strode a daughter, but they didn't make the daughter Jamie. They didn't cast Danielle Harris, who previously was in Halloween 4 and 5, the Jamie character in 4, 5, and 6. And the thing about it is, like, I love Jamie Lee Curtis in these movies. I really do. But Danielle Harris has been way more heavily involved within the horror realm, within the horror circuit, doing the cons, being in other horror movies. She played Annie in the Rob Zombie rebooted Halloween. Like, she is a massive part of this franchise. And I'm not saying that because I just met her at a Comic-Con and could barely contain my simping, but that's besides the point. The point is, if you're going to give Jamie a daughter, all things being equal, this would have been the perfect opportunity to put the two main stars of the Halloween franchise. You know, you can't put, obviously, Donald Pleasance in anymore because he passed away, but the other two main stars are Jamie Lee Curtis and Danielle Harris. And if you have this opportunity to put them together in a movie, they've never been on screen together before, I just don't understand why you wouldn't take that opportunity to do that. You know, it's kind of even a bigger missed opportunity. I always talk about the new Star Wars movies that they made. It's like you had Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher all agree to do it, but you couldn't come up with one scene to have all the characters together. Like, how does that happen, right? And I look at this, and I'm like, okay, you're rebooting Halloween, which means all the characters are alive. You gave Laurie Strode a daughter. All right, it's going to be Danielle Harris, right? And they don't do it. It's just insane to me. And that's all my personal pet peeves, because those are the things that I would want to see in the Halloween franchise. I prefer Laurie and Michael being siblings, but okay, if you're not going to do that, fine, I'm open to it. But okay, let's put all of that aside once again. What is the story of this movie? So, Michael Myers has been in the asylum for the past 40 years. There's a new doctor character, influenced and curious about the mind of Michael Myers, and is the contributor to setting him free, causes the bus crash, and, Michael is set loose, goes back to Haddonfield, and, hilarity ensues. On the flip side, with Laurie Strode's character, she is living in a goddamn fortress. She has trained herself in a variety of weapons and guns. She has huge gates around her house. She created her house specifically to be a trap for Michael Myers if he ever escaped, with her basement, trapping Michael in there and then setting the house ablaze and everything. And she has just gone full survivalist hardcore, in this film. And I am okay with that idea, but the thing about it is, if they're not siblings and it's only happened once 40 years ago, I think that it is a little bit overkill. I actually think that Halloween H2O handled Laurie dealing with the trauma and the stress a lot better than the Halloween 2018 version. And if you think about it, the H2O version of Laurie dealt with more shit because they are siblings. She went through all this stuff in Halloween 2, and this version of Laurie only went through the events of Halloween, the first movie. And there's no conceivable reason as to why Michael would come after her again, and it's been 40 years later, and somehow this version of Laurie is way more stressed out, way more serious about it, and just has basically created this entire life for herself where she's living in this goddamn fortress. And it just seems like a little bit too much for what had happened to her before. And I'm not trying to dismiss being chased and stabbed by a serial killer, but like, it compared to how Halloween H2O did it, I thought H2O did it in a much more realistic way, where she's trying to start this new life, and she's changed her name, she's changed her identity, she's dealing with the stress, but still has this full-time job, and still is dealing with raising her son and everything. Where she eventually has to rise up and face Michael at the end of the movie, kind of facing down this thing that's haunted her for 20 years. Whereas the 2018 version takes this huge leap of her falling into this massive anxiety over this situation. And again, I get it. I get what they were going for. But I just think if you look at the previous Halloween movies, I think it has been done better than how it was presented in this movie. And again, rebooting the timeline, rebooting the continuity, rebooting the sibling thing. It's like, okay, so what are you, by getting rid of all that and doing this new version of Laurie, what are you going for with Laurie Strode here? But I want to take a second, and I want to say something here also, is that I don't hate this movie. I don't hate Halloween 2018, and I think it's an incredibly well-made movie. I want to say my positives on it. So I do think that it is incredibly well-directed. I think all the actors do a great job. Jamie Lee Curtis does a great job in her performance. And this is no slight against Judy Greer playing her daughter. I think Judy Greer is a great actress. I'm just saying, all things being equal, I don't understand why you wouldn't put Danielle Harris in the movie, but I think she does a fine job. The actress playing their granddaughter, Allison, I think she does a fine job. I think all the acting performances in this film are mostly really good. My favorite character is actually the police officer played by Will Patton. And I think that he has a fantastic setup in this movie, even better in Halloween Kills. And then they ruin his character in Halloween Ends, but I'll get to that. But besides that, I think that this movie is very, very well made. I think that the horror sequences work pretty well. My favorite shot of the entire film is when Michael is walking around Haddonfield on Halloween night. He goes into the garage. I love how he picks up the hammer and then kills somebody with it, and then drops the hammer, grabs the knife instead. I love all of that stuff. It's great. How Michael Myers himself is handled in the film, I think, is done very, very well. I think the presence of him, the way that he feels, the way that he moves, the way that he walks, all of those things are done great. And here's the best part, is the mask looks fantastic. That is like the biggest praise I'll give all three of these movies, is they actually got the mask right. How many times have we seen a horrible Michael Myers mask? They actually did it great in these three films. And I love the battle damage that happens on the mask as the trilogy goes on, how it gets all burned on the side from Halloween Kills into Halloween Ends. The mask is fantastic. So that's the biggest praise I give the entire trilogy, is thank God you finally got the mask right. And of course, it goes without saying, but the score of all three of these movies, done by John Carpenter and his son and some other people that contributed as well. The score for all three of these movies is fantastic. The music is so good. That one track that plays when Michael kills Allison's friend and then chases her and she's running through the streets, where they kind of like enhance the original Halloween theme. It is just so good. And I will say, consistently throughout all three of these movies, the music is amazing and some of the best of the entire franchise by far. I listen to it on its own. Even the Halloween Ends score, there's particular tracks in there that I love, and I will just throw those on. I put them on my Halloween playlist. They're fantastic. This might sound very morbid, but I like that Michael kills a kid in this movie. There's the kid that finds the bus. He shoots the doctor by accident, and then Michael kills them. I like when kids die in horror movies. I like when horror movies have the balls to kill a kid. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a way to do it tastefully, and there's a way to do it where it's just exploitative and shocking for shocking's sake. And that's not what this movie did. This movie did it in a very good way and establishes the threat of Michael Myers. He doesn't kill the baby, but he kills the kid. And I appreciate that about this movie. But unfortunately, going back into my negatives, is I think this movie has a lot of really bad humor in it. There's a lot of moments where it seems like they are particularly setting up to be the comic relief scene, and they want you to know so badly it's the comic relief scene, where there will just be extended moments of dialogue with characters saying like sarcastic, monotone, awkward humor. Like there's that whole scene with the little kid that's being babysat, which it just doesn't work for me. There's the two cops that are sitting in the car talking about sandwiches for 3 minutes. I don't know. There's literally a line in this movie that says, "I have peanut butter on my penis." And I think it's meant to be funny, but I don't know, man. I just don't know. The humor in this film does not work for me whatsoever, and there's way too much of it. I think there's a ton of humor injected into this movie that feels completely unnatural, and it just feels like the filmmakers are saying, hey, this is the funny part. We know this is a horror movie, but hey, this is the comedy part. Pay attention to the comedy scene, instead of blending the comedy and horror, like other movies like American Werewolf in London or Return of the Living Dead or something, where it's just like it's so seamless that it all works together. This movie hits the brakes to give you the comedy scene and then goes back to the horror. I think all the stuff that happens in the finale at Laurie's house is fine. Like, it all works for me okay. I like when Michael gets his finger shot off and, he has to deal with that. I think that, getting Michael into the trap worked kind of okay. But ultimately, I still don't see the need for the rebooting of the character of Laurie Strode or how she really plays into the dynamic with Michael Myers, because what happens is the doctor, who was so curious about Michael to begin with, takes Michael to Laurie's house for them to have this final confrontation. She traps him, sets the house ablaze, and that's kind of where it ends. We have some cool kill sequences from here to there, but ultimately the rebooting and the changing of the established lore didn't really seem like it added too much to this film. And if you had Laurie and Michael be siblings, I don't think it would have changed too much about the story, to be honest. So Halloween 2018 is very much in the middle for me. There are things that I really enjoy about it, but mostly I'm just not a huge fan of this version. And I might be in the minority here, because I do hear a lot of people say that this is the best Halloween sequel or one of their favorite Halloween movies. And to me, I think it's just okay. I'd still put Halloween, the original Halloween 2, 3, 4, even 5. I know a lot of people hate 5, but I would put all of those above 2018 as well. So I don't know. It's very much a definitive definition of a mixed bag for me. But now let's get even more controversial. As I say, I'm not a huge fan of 2018, and a lot of people love it. Now let's move to the other side of the spectrum, and I swear I'm not trying to be different, but this is just the truth. Halloween Kills, the second movie in the trilogy, is my favorite of the trilogy. I'm going to try to explain why, and I'm going to start with the beginning of the movie, which is a flashback going back to 1978, and this is my favorite scene of all 3 movies. I thought this was incredibly well done. They made it look just like, although it's not on film, it's digital, but like they made it look just like the 1978 Halloween, picking up during the same night. I love the scenes that are on the Haddonfield streets in the middle of the night and the way that it looks, and they take their time with it. There's the long lingering shots that are similar to Halloween 1978, and that's one thing that a lot of the other sequels never really did, is they never really took their time with the shots. A lot of the John Carpenter shots from the original will just be static, and you'll see things kind of moving in the background, or you'll see Michael Myers, carrying Annie into the house and everything, and you didn't really get a lot of that in the sequels, where it's a lot more fast paced. The editing is a lot more I guess just quicker cuts, whereas in the opening sequence of Halloween Kills, I think they did a really good job of sort of mimicking that John Carpenter style, which was great. And they have this extended flashback sequence with a younger version of the Will Patton character, Deputy Hawkins, how they go to inspect the Myers house. He's with another police officer. That officer gets attacked by Michael, and Hawkins tries to shoot Michael, but ends up shooting the other officer by mistake, being the one that actually kills him, as opposed to Michael killing him. And it was this big traumatic thing that caused him to have this panic moment. They have Dr. Loomis show up. Motherfucking Dr. Loomis is in this. What? This is great. I love seeing Dr. Loomis. They did a great job capturing, making him look, like Donald Pleasance and everything too. And Hawkins is the one responsible for stopping Loomis from executing Michael on the spot. So he has this built-in guilt of, one, killing another officer by mistake, and two, being the reason that Michael was not executed that night, which leads to him feeling responsible for everybody else being murdered when Michael escapes 40 years later. This is a great setup to a character arc. This is fantastic. This gives so much more understanding to the way that he was acting in the 2018 version. It gives him an established motivation, it gives him a backstory, and it gives him a potential redemption arc, and it's great. Let's go. Let's do this story. They don't do the story. I don't think it's this movie's fault in particular. I think that's more of the fault of Halloween Ends not following up on the established built-up story that you were making in the first two movies. Because in this movie, Hawkins has been stabbed from 2018, and he goes to the hospital, and him and Laurie are in the hospital pretty much the entire film. And they sort of build up their dynamic there too, which I think is really great. They have a little bit of a chemistry, a little bit of a romance kind of building there, a little bit of a connection based upon their previous trauma with Michael Myers. You know, it's a good thing to build a romantic connection out of, I guess. But it actually works really well for me, and I like those two characters together. And I thought that it was a good idea to kind of build up their story, but set them in the background to kind of build towards that third final film, which of course doesn't follow through on any of this, but we'll get there. Now, the biggest criticism I have seen for Halloween Kills is people not liking the whole evil dies tonight thing. They didn't like the way that it was portrayed. They didn't like the way that the town responded. But I kind of disagree completely. I actually really like the idea of having an entire Halloween film from the perspective of the citizens of Haddonfield, as opposed to it needing to be directly Laurie Strode or even her daughter or granddaughter in this film, even though her granddaughter does have a lot more to do. I think I really enjoy the idea of seeing how the town responds to this and how they act together and that whole mob mentality. And yeah, maybe it is a little bit cheesy. Maybe the dialogue's not great. I'll grant you that. Maybe evil dies tonight is said a little too often in the film. But the idea of having an angry mob form from the town is not a new idea when it comes to horror movies. It's a standard horror trope that maybe isn't done as much these days, but if you go back to like the original Universal, monster movies with Frankenstein and all of that, it's a common thing that the paranoia and the fear of the town gets people together, gets people collected, and they create this mob mentality where they are so desperate and determined to destroy this evil force that is disrupting the town. And so I really like the idea of the townspeople themselves taking it upon themselves, forming this little militia and going out, and I like that it's being led by Tommy Doyle, who has, the previous experience with Michael from the first movie. Even though they don't bring the little boy actor back, they do bring Linda. I think, wait, is that her name? No, Lindsay. Sorry, they bring Lindsay back, the same actress from the original, looking pretty good in her old age, actually, I gotta say. And they bring the nurse back, Dr. Loomis's nurse. And they even have Lonnie, who was the little bully from the first movie. And I like how Lonnie and Tommy Doyle have become friends over time. Even though he was bullying him when they were kids, I like that they've sort of reconciled their differences and became friends. I like that idea. There's a lot of stuff here that I really, really enjoy. I like the scene of the townspeople chasing down the other escaped mental patient from the first movie, or Halloween 2018. And killing him, unceremoniously, in just showing sort of the madness of the town and how Michael Myers has infected the town to act this way. And all of that stuff, to me, is stuff that I really enjoy. It takes me back to like that Twilight Zone episode, The Monsters on Maple Street, where the aliens basically kind of fuck with the town a little bit and cause everybody to kill each other so that they don't even have to lift a finger. And that's how it works sometimes. That fear and paranoia and that distrust and that anger and that rage it just kind of causes a whole community to collapse in upon itself. The mob mentality, like I said, and all of that stuff, I think maybe it's not executed fantastically, but I think it's done decent enough, and it never bothered me. When I was watching the movie in the theater, I loved all that stuff, and it wasn't until afterwards and I saw everybody complaining online that they didn't like it, and I just disagree. I mean, I'm sure I'm in the minority here, but I thought it was done well for me. This is also, by far, the most gory Halloween film, except for maybe the Rob Zombie version. But I still think this movie might take the top spot as far as the most amount of blood and gore in a Halloween film. There are so many great kills. The movie is called Halloween Kills. There better be some damn good kills here. And there are. When Michael massacres the entire fireman team in the beginning of the film, all of that looks great. You got the aesthetic of the burning building in the background. You got Michael lifting people off the ground, ripping people up. It is just something that I, as a gore hound, I guess, I'd love to see. I love to see that kind of stuff in horror films. The scene where he stabs that woman in the neck with the fluorescent light and then just continues to stab multiple knives into her husband or boyfriend or whatever that character was. Just terrifying. She's sitting there like watching Michael Myers and he's just like knife, stab, knife, stab. When he kills the gay couple, Big John and Little John, I actually thought their humor was done better in this movie than any of the humor in 2018. And he just gouges the eyes out of the one character. Like all of that stuff is great. I think one of the funniest kills is when the girl is running up with a gun and Michael kicks the door open and she shoots herself. Yes, it's stupid, but I love it. I love that kind of carnage in my slasher films. And I like that Halloween was able to take a break from Laurie Strode. And it is similar to the original Halloween 2 in the setup because it takes place on the same night and Laurie's in the hospital. Except in this version, Michael never goes to the hospital. He has no incentive to. And instead, he just wreaks havoc throughout the town. And I even like the final scene with the mob of people outside and everybody attacking Michael at the same time. We get a cameo from Sheriff Brackett from the original. And then it reaches this point where Michael just has had enough and he gets up and he kills the ever-living shit out of everybody. And the movie ends with Michael on this massive massacre and then eventually killing Judy Greer's character. But I liked it, man. I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it. This is a fun movie for me. It's my favorite of the Blumhouse trilogy. I'm sorry. But then we get to Halloween Ends and everything just goes up in flames. I said when I reviewed this before that Halloween Ends is not the worst Halloween movie, but it damn sure tries to be. I'd say the only two I dislike more are Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 and Halloween Resurrection. But Halloween Ends is right there. So Halloween Kills basically builds us up to what will be the final confrontation between Laurie and Michael. And I actually would have preferred Halloween Ends to still take place on the same night. I think that would have been cool to just have a full trilogy all taking place on the same night. But instead we cut in real time to a couple of years later. But Halloween Kills ends with Michael killing Karen, which is Laurie Strode's daughter, and Laurie Strode grabbing the knife and basically, you know, committing herself to this pursuit of taking down Michael for good. Great setup for a final film. This cuts several years later. Michael is nowhere to be found for some reason, and now Laurie has just bought a house in the middle of Haddonfield. And it's explained on, it's this disregarded line of dialogue that I hate, where it's like, okay, so for 40 years, 40 years, that's a long time. I haven't even been alive that long. 40 years. I'm getting close though. You lived in a fortress, scared that someday Michael is going to escape and that you're going to have to put him down, right? You did all this training. You built a trap house for 40 years. You lived this way. And Michael never got out. In this continuity, he never escaped. So no Michael Myers for 40 years. Now, at the end of Halloween Kills, you know for a fact that Michael Myers is free and on the loose and could attack at any time, and your daughter was just killed by him. And the response is just to buy a house in Haddonfield and just live freely. Now, I know she's always waiting for Michael to show up and she's, you know, got guns and stuff and is prepared, but like, it just is, it feels like such an out of character moment that she says like, I just decided to buy a house and live normally. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. None of that makes sense for the way that you reestablished and rebuilt her character up in 2018 to be a very specific version of Laurie Strode that is ultra paranoid and ultra prepared. And then in Halloween Ends, she's just, yeah, I'm just going to live normally and see what happens. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And there's not really any moment or situation or character turning point that would make me believe that the Laurie Strode that I watched the first two movies would suddenly be living like this. I don't get it. But Halloween Ends is not about Laurie Strode. Halloween Ends is about Corey Cunningham. And once again, I want to reiterate, I think these movies are all very well made. I think the performances are good. I don't have anything against the actor playing Corey. It has nothing to do with anything personal of any of the filmmakers or any of the actors themselves. I'm just talking about the storyline and how I feel like it doesn't make sense and doesn't have a satisfying conclusion. But when you get to the character of Corey, he is not a character that was introduced or mentioned or talked about in the first two movies. Instead, he comes along in the third film and becomes essentially the main character of the entire film, where in the beginning he is babysitting a kid, accidentally kills the kid because the kid traps him in a closet as a prank. He kicks the door open, the door hits the kid, falls down the staircase, dies. So yeah, accidentally murdering a child, probably going to ruin your life. Fair. But it seems to be that the idea of this movie was moving towards this passing of the torch, as they've attempted or alluded to in previous Halloween films, like with Jamie at the end of Halloween 4, and then they went back on it. And in this movie, they seem to be doing the same thing, but they also do kind of go back on it at the end of the film, where now there's this stigma around Corey, where he's known as this freak show, this child killer. You know, it was all an accident, and he didn't go to jail or anything, but now he's sort of this outcast of the town. And without Michael Myers around, the town needs an enemy. It's almost as if you need to create a villain. You need to create somebody to direct your hatred towards. And that's what the Corey character represents. And I guess the idea that I understand, or that I'm trying to get from this movie, is that it's basically saying that if you treat somebody a particular way and present them a particular way and view them a particular way, you know, and there's no getting around it, it's sort of like you corrupt them into being what you see them as. Even though he's not a murderer, in the beginning of the movie, the way that the town presses him and pushes him ultimately leads him to taking on that role. But then there's also this moment where he meets Michael Myers in this sewer system, who has just been chilling in there for some reason. And as powerful as Michael was in the previous two movies, now he's just this weak old man. And it seemed like he was like, there's a moment where Michael grabs Corey and looks him in the eyes, and it's a curious moment that's not directly explained. I believe it's meant to be an audience interpretation kind of moment, but you almost wonder, did Michael transfer any kind of evil energy to him, or did Michael just recognize the potential of evil within him and that's why he let him go? I'm not really sure either way, but the reason that I don't like any of this is because, number one, it's as if the movies themselves couldn't decide if they wanted Michael Myers to be supernatural or not, because in the first two films, 2018 and Kills, it would seem to be that Michael is this supernatural force because he's incredibly strong, he's crushing skulls, he's surviving gunshots, he's going through all of this madness, and he is absolutely unstoppable. But now you say that 4 years later, he's just this kind of crippled old man that's living in the sewer, that's, you know, eating whatever the homeless people bring him, and he hasn't gone out and killed or done anything in the last 4 years. Why? I don't know why. The movie never really explains why. And then you have the idea of Corey being villainized and turning into a new antagonist for the town, but the thing about that just rubs me the wrong way in the story of Halloween is that Michael Myers never became evil because of the way the town viewed him. Michael Myers is just pure evil incarnate because he is this supernatural force. He is the Shape. He was 6 years old, grabbed a knife, killed his sister for no reason, never spoke another word, and then when he escaped afterwards, decided to stalk some babysitters and kill them too. And then if you go further, you know, Laurie and him are siblings and all that kind of stuff. But like, Michael never had a reason. He never had an explanation. And that's sort of what makes him so terrifying. But this movie goes completely out of its way to build up an extreme explanation as to why Corey becomes the next killer of the town. And I just don't see the parallel there. I don't see the parallel between Michael Myers and Corey because they're completely different. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the point is like evil always manifests in a different way. But again, this is the third movie in a trilogy that was building up particular storylines that abandoned them in order to tell this Corey storyline. And maybe the Corey storyline is an extension of the town madness from the second movie, but it just doesn't quite work. And it goes even further into not working for me because Corey strikes up a relationship with Allison, Laurie's granddaughter, and to me, I don't feel like they have any chemistry whatsoever. Just absolutely zero. I don't understand why Allison likes him. Now, maybe if they had introduced Corey in the first movie in 2018, and maybe if Allison and Corey were already dating, and I could imagine they had this established background, that would have made more sense. But he just, like, Laurie kind of introduces them, and Allison is just immediately infatuated with him for, I don't understand why. I don't see any chemistry whatsoever. And then with my favorite character of the new movies, Deputy Hawkins, they do nothing with him. He has 2 scenes, one where he's in a grocery store flirting with Laurie. It's a cute little scene, but that's it. And then he shows up at the very end. And all of the stuff that they built up with Halloween Kills and the way that he feels about Michael and his feeling of survivor's guilt and his responsibility and the flashback sequence, they don't do anything with it. I was so disappointed that he's barely in this movie. I was like, why did they keep him alive after Halloween 2018 if they're not going to do anything with him? He has no interaction with Michael Myers whatsoever. He has no interaction in any of the horror stuff and any of the action stuff. He only shows up at the very end when Michael is already basically dead. I think it's an extremely disappointing character arc for him because it's not an arc. It's a setup with no payoff whatsoever. And you could do stuff like that, in stories sometimes, but in this particular case, I think it's just a massive missed opportunity. And that's how I feel about a lot of this film, is that it's a massive missed opportunity. You barely have Laurie Strode in this movie, where, the previous 2 were building her up to her final confrontation. She has more incentive now because her daughter is killed, and you just kind of leave her to be this character that's kind of living in Haddonfield, and she feels suspicious about Corey, but she doesn't really go full against him until the very end where he comes to kill her. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, now we're going to have our final fight with Laurie and Michael. It's like, that's not what this movie was. But we got to have it in here because that's what we promised everybody. And it does the ultimate sin of having Corey put on the Michael Myers mask and be the Michael for 90% of this movie. Where he goes and he kills the bullies in the junkyard and he kills the people at the radio station. And all of these kills are happening. And some of the kills are cool, but they're not being done by Michael Myers. And so it makes you feel a particular way about it. I know some people really love this movie and they love this idea and this concept, but I think that they drop a lot of the better elements from the first 2 in order to do this Corey storyline. And I guess they just wanted to do something different. They wanted to take this concept of the town building up a new entity of evil, and I get all that. But everything in between doesn't work for me because in order to tell this story, you have to take away established continuity of what you've created before, as in Michael Myers being this powerful supernatural force, as in Laurie and Laurie's hatred towards Michael and leading towards the final confrontation. With the Hawkins storyline, you have to have Allison just completely disregard, who she was in the first 2 movies and then have a relationship with Corey that has no chemistry and doesn't make any sense. And so I'm not saying that the Corey storyline in itself was done poorly. I think if you're focusing on that character and that's the story you want to tell, sure, it accomplished its goals. But in order to tell that story, you have to take away everything else that was built up from before. And to me, that's the disappointing part of this movie. And what happened to all of Michael Myers' strength and power when he finally faces off against Laurie Strode at the end? It's just a scene that happens in a kitchen. Whereas in 2018, when they were facing off against each other, it was throughout the entire house. There were multiple sequences. There were multiple different set pieces that were happening. In this movie, it's just like they had to cram it in at the very end because they're like, oh yeah, people want the fight between Laurie and Michael. We got to have it in here. And they just shoved it in this little room and had flashback sequences from the original 1978 movie to be like, yeah, isn't this what you guys remember? Isn't this what you guys wanted? And it just seemed like they were just cramming it all in that final 10 minutes to be like, don't worry, we're going to give you what you want. But by that point, it was too little too late. And it also goes back on its own idea with having Corey be the new entity of evil because he fails and Michael has to kill him himself. And then it goes back to Michael Myers being the final antagonist anyway. So there was no passing of the torch ultimately at the end of the day. So it took 2 movies for this new continuity to win me over and get me past the problems that I had with it starting initially. And then I was finally on board. And then Halloween Ends comes out and just rips it all away. And it had been 2 years since I watched Halloween Ends. I'd only seen it once in the theater, and I just finally rewatched it now that I have the full Blumhouse trilogy. And I was hoping, honestly, I didn't want to shit on it again. I was hoping that I would find something in that movie that I missed the first time. I was hoping that the second time watching Halloween Ends, I would appreciate it more than I did the first time. Unfortunately, I have to report, I pretty much feel the same way. And now that I've seen it twice, I don't really see that changing. So ultimately, when it comes down to the Blumhouse Halloween timeline, I'm very mixed on it. It is a well-executed, well-directed, greatly acted movie series with a phenomenal soundtrack. And it does justice to Michael Myers, at least in the first 2 movies, with the performance of the character, with the way that the mask looks, with the way that the kills are done. So Michael Myers is great in 2018 in Kills, and Ends kind of ruins him a bit, but those are the things that I really enjoy about it. What I dislike is moving to a different timeline, removing the sibling dynamic, not putting Jamie in there, and then focusing on an entirely new different character with a new different premise for Halloween Ends that I think makes it fall apart. But there are some gems throughout the trilogy, and ultimately I think it's okay. My preferred Halloween timeline is always going to be, I guess, the Thorn timeline. Even though I don't like Halloween 6 that much with the Thorn stuff, I do like Halloween 1 and 2. I like that 2 picks up right where 1 left off. I like the stuff in the hospital. I enjoy that film quite a bit. Actually, the more I watch it, the more and more I enjoy it. I like Halloween 3. I like all the stuff that happens in Halloween 4. I like having as much Dr. Loomis as I possibly can. So basically what I do is I watch Halloween 1 through 7. I watch all the way up to H2O. And in my mind, I just pretend, even though I know it's not true, I pretend that H2O is in the same continuity and that it ends with Laurie chopping off Michael's head. And that's the end of the franchise for me. Everything else is just kind of like an occasional bonus. Anyways, guys, after this long-winded video, what do you think of the Blumhouse Halloween trilogy? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you in the middle like me? What did you think about it? And now that it's been a couple years since Halloween Ends came out, do you feel the same way about it, or did you change your opinion? Unfortunately, I feel the same way as it came out, but maybe some other people feel like after time has gone on, they like it more. I don't know. No opinion is wrong. This is all just our opinions, our preferences. If you love Halloween Ends, I don't hate you. We're all in the same club still. It's okay. But let me know what you think down below, guys. Please give the video a like and a comment. I'd appreciate it. Happy Halloween, everybody. I'll talk to you next time.